Discover how one nickel can make millions. And how an underground industry can help spark one of the biggest bank robberies in Canadian history. Find out the truth behind the Jukebox Empire. This week on After 6. Do you know what goes on in a juke house? Boy, don't you know there's gambling and a whole lot of drinking and a whole lot of hot women. And I don't want no boy of mine in a juke house. A place where coinmen draw you in and swindlers take it all away. The setting for a Jukebox Empire, a book by David Rabinovich. Listener discretion advised. Dr. John, the Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu on a honky-tonk piano. A player piano could easily play that piece back in the 1920s. But player pianos took a lot to maintain. It was very easy for one of those things to break down and all the hole punch paper to go everywhere. This was all until the invention of the jukebox occurred, or more accurately, the audiophone, released back in 1890. The audiophone was much like a telephone, and all the listener had to do was put a coin in and turn on the record player and listen to it through a phone. This was rather inconvenient because it could only play one side per time. It wasn't until the invention of the Philbin type jukebox, designed by William Philbin, that the jukebox really took off. The Philbin was based around a jukebox whose model is named the Stowaway. A jukebox with less glitz and glamour, but able to be stowed in a convenient location. It was simply a turntable with a few platters that could easily be manipulated through a mechanism that would change each disc simultaneously. Think of it like an early stereo. Get your kicks on Route 66.
This is The Rock 97.3 1079, and we're taking a look back at the early days of the jukebox and the novel Jukebox Empire. Ah, the jukebox. Easier to play, easier to maintain, and unfortunately, the perfect place for the perfect crime.
We all wanna know, yeah.
Big Bad Voodoo Daddy, Mr. Pinstripe Suit. Hello, I'm Bryce Davis from After 6, and we're taking a look at David Rabinovich's Jukebox Empire. And I have an answer to a burning question you all want to know, and that is, how did these juke joints back in the 1930s make a lot of money and have the perfect scheme for the perfect crime? Imagine this scenario. You're in your favorite club. You pop in a quarter to a jukebox. Where does the money go? Does the owner of the club collect most of the money? Or does the owner of the jukebox collect most of it? Well, if you chose the owner of the jukebox, you're exactly right. Back in the old days, that's what they did. You see, they had coinmen, or the salesmen of the jukebox, to sell to the restaurant or club to which the jukebox is going to be placed. And then they had the swindlers, the money collectors that nobody really liked and nobody really cared for. But who's going to blame them? Because all they're doing is collecting money that you put in that jukebox. Nobody else is going to know that there's a crime going on or money laundering. All it is good, clean fun.
you're listening to a song, you're not causing any crime here. But the money that's being collected is not being handled in a manner that's respectable or appropriate. The money is being swindled and packed away, circulating in the mafia, selling bootleg copies of some of your favorite songs to another distributor of another jukebox, collecting millions of dollars in nickels. Many of the operators of these so-called machines were gamblers and racketeers, designing slot machines to play their own game of give and take. One of these racketeers was by the name of Meyer Lansky. We'll get more into him later. But for right now, just know that Rockola was in big competition with our main character of the story, Wolf Rovanovich. He would eventually design car radios in the early days after his career at his father's drugstore, which was more or less like a job selling tonics and medicines. He would eventually design radios for the soldiers, a way to keep in touch with loved ones and people on the line of duty.
Round and round, down and down and down in a spin. Well, I love that spin. Under old black magic called love. Under black magic called love.
Amby Hughes, That Old Black Magic, a song from a 78 RPM record from the Library of Congress, able to be played on this week's Marvel of Interest, The Jukebox and the Jukebox Empire. This concludes part 1 of our investigation into the strange but true story of the Jukebox Empire. Be sure to tune in for part 2 of this exciting story, followed by an interview with the author. To get your copy, search for The Jukebox Empire by David Rabinovich and search for thejukeboxempire.com. And now, part 2 of Jukebox Empire, written by author David Rabinovich.
Find out my reasons on rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
Rock and roll has got to go. And go it does at KWK. We're all through playing rock and roll records. This week is record-breaking week here at KWK.
Don't rock the jukebox. Wanna hear some Jones? 'Cause my heart ain't ready for the Rolling Stone. I don't feel like rocking since my baby's gone. So don't rock the jukebox. Play me a country song.
Emmy-winning journalist and TV producer, David got his start at CBC Radio in Canada. But it really all began on a show called Reach for the Top.
Well, in radio, my career began a very long time ago, but a series of, fortuitous events that couldn't be foreseen. When I was a teenager, I think about 15 years old, I was on a television quiz program for high school students. It was called Reach for the Top. In the US, there was a similar series called College Bowl. And after the show was over, the first time we appeared in the studio, I went back into the control room and I thought, this is a really interesting place. All these monitors and people. And of course, it was full of smoke because everybody smoked back then. And I asked someone in the control room, I said, well, this looks really interesting. How do I get to do what you do? And because the CBC, which was modeled on the BBC, had departments for everything, there was someone in there who was sympathetic. And he said, well, we have a schools and youth department, and you need to meet the producer. Well, what's her name? They gave me the woman's name, and I called up and made an appointment and went in and interviewed. And at the time, I think I was the editor of my high school newspaper. So, I knew what a story was. And I pitched some story ideas and they were accepted. And that's how I began to produce radio documentaries and also appear eventually as the co-host of a national radio program in Canada for young adults.
Fabulous. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Jukebox Empire. And this is actually your one and only book that you've written so far. And you don't classify this as a novel. That's interesting.
Well, it is a true story. This is a work of journalism and falls in the category of narrative nonfiction. So I've written in many forms for radio, for television, for newspapers and magazines, but it is my first published full-length book. But no, it's not a novel. What's kind of amazing about it is that it is a true story that is as sensational as a fictional story like Ocean's 11.
I know it reads really well. If you're not a reader, this book is definitely something to read because it's hard to put it down. But there are details in there. So you want to take your time and really read through it. And one of the things that I guess I'm trying to understand a little bit is we were talking a little bit about the jukebox and the history you had there with the early days, with starting all the way back with the player piano going forward. And I was just curious to see if you look up your uncle, Uncle Wolf, and you Google him, it'll say that he was a pioneer in the jukebox industry. Did he ever have any designs that were named after him? Because I didn't see his name pretty much.
No, it's very interesting. This is, my uncle, it was an uncle whom I had never met, which was very unusual in my family, and he was my father's brother. My father was one of 7 children, and a family that was far-flung but rather close-knit. So it was unusual to me to have a close relative like that I'd never met. And I was full of curiosity, and I would ask my father about him, and at one point he said, well, he made the jukebox that revolutionized the music industry in the 1940s. So I looked into that and also learning more about my uncle's background. He had no formal education in electronics, but he had a natural ability. So in the early 1930s, he had begun to manufacture car radios when something we take for granted now, but then it was an absolute breakthrough. It required the miniaturization of the vacuum tubes, which were, enormous at that point. It required technology to develop the antennas. Early car radio antennas took the whole roof of the car. So he made his first fortune in the mid-1930s making car radios. And then he segued into other forms of radio production. And as consumer production was canceled during World War II so that factories could be repurposed to make the things that were necessary for the Army and Navy and the other armed services, he began to make radio equipment for the armed forces, which was particularly critical to him because his brother, another one of my uncles, was serving in the U.S. Armed Forces in the South Pacific as a signals officer, which makes sense because he had worked together with his brother making radios. So when the war ended, the factories all went quiet, and he was looking for something new to do. And that's the beginning of his involvement with the jukebox. After the war, my uncle was looking for a new venture. And some businessmen came to him and said, you know, we're in the jukebox business, but we're distributors. We're looking to, we're the, you know, run the companies that collect the money from the machines. But now we'd like to go into manufacturing. And they showed him some plans they had acquired for a machine that could play 30 records. Now today, you know, we have little pods in our ears and we can play 5 million songs or choose from whatever we would like. In those days, music was more of a social event. You had to gather around the record player or the radio or in a public space around the jukebox. And to have, at that time, immediately after World War II, 1945, the most any jukebox could play was 10 records. So to have this design that could play 30 would revolutionize the business. And my uncle took a look at it and said, well, you know, there's flaws in this, but I can build it and I can build it better. And that's how he became involved with the darker side of the music industry.
Some people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood. Muscle and blood and skin and bones. A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning when the sun didn't shine. I picked up my shovel and I walked to the mine. I loaded 16 tons, a number 9 coal, and the straw boss said, well, bless my soul, you load 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. I was born one morning, it was drizzling rain. Fighting and trouble are my middle name. I was raised in the canebrake by an old mama lion. Can't no high-toned woman make me walk the line. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. If you see me coming, better step aside. A lot of men didn't, a lot of men died. One fist of iron, the other of steel. If the right one don't get you, then the left one will. You load 16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul.
Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons. David Rabinovich, The Jukebox Empire. On KEBF in Morro Bay, KZSR in Paso Robles. Listener-supported community radio for the Central Coast. Right, or the darker side of the American dream, as you put it on your title with Jukebox Empire.
So just a little bit about how the jukebox industry worked. location owners, whether it was a diner or a restaurant or a dance hall or a canteen, never actually owned the machine. They got a percentage of the coins in the machine, but machines were owned by the distributors who came around and collected all the coins. And this was a natural for money laundering because it was a cash business. They would keep a double set of books. On the official books, the small amount that would be reported to the government as taxable income. And then the bulk of it, 60, 70, 80%, that went into their own pockets and for their own ventures. So the move to work with my uncle and how he became involved with these racketeers is really the beginning of the vertical integration of organized crime. It was a way in which those racketeers could then actually control the production of a machine as well as its distribution and revenue collection.
Wow, so they were able to control like where the money was going, who had what copy of what song, and things like that.
Well, that goes further into how they ran the business and actually got their arms around the whole entertainment business. Controlling the jukeboxes, they also controlled the playlists, what songs would be on the box. So if there was a particular artist they wanted to promote, it might be the son or daughter or cousin of one of the racketeers who, in most cases, didn't have great talent, maybe just enough. But if you kept placing their records, their songs in the number 1, number 2, number 3 position on the jukeboxes, they got a lot of play. And they could manufacture an American Idol in this manner.
Right. It's a lot like how American Idol and all the America's Got Talent, they kind of do their work. And actually, the touch tunes, the jukeboxes that are owned by AMI, they attempt to kind of do the similar things where they have, let's play music by, the American Top 40, and there's only certain songs on here from a certain artist. They don't put everything on there.
Well, exactly. It was the same reach into whether it was the disc jockeys, the radio announcers, and in this case, the jukeboxes, the machines. So this is how the mob used its influence in the music industry.
Cool. That's really interesting that he was able to do that for so long without getting caught. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to do it.
Well, today there still are jukeboxes, but everything's digital, so everything is tracked. There's a record of everything. We're looking at a technology where, a nickel bought a song and a quarter bought 5 songs initially, and there was no tracking of it. I suppose there were some kind of counters in the machines, but those could be easily, as spun as easily as the tumblers on a bank vault. And it really was a bank vault to the owners of the industries, because in congressional hearings that were held in 1958, it was estimated that unreported income from coin machines, not just jukeboxes, but soft drink machines, cigarette machines, any kind of vending machine, unreported income in 1958 was estimated at nearly $2.5 billion.
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
If you allow for inflation, that might be a couple of $100 billion today. Unreported income, not taxable.
Man, that's that's a big paycheck.
A lot of power.
Yes. But I mean, how did he get involved with like the biggest bank robbery though? I mean, was it because he was just in the wrong place?
Well, okay, now this we're talking in my book Jukebox Empire. The first third of the book is about how my uncle, Wolf Rabin, built a jukebox, which was called the Maestro, that revolutionized the industry. But that was extremely successful in the mid-1940s, mid to late 1940s, to the extent that he bought a surplus plane from the U.S. Army, a troop transport, a Lockheed Lodestar, and he barnstormed the country with his jukebox and dealers and salespeople. And it was an absolute sensation. But there were issues with the initial plans that the racketeers had brought to him. And so there was a lawsuit over the patents involved. The lawsuit was filed by David Rockola of the Rockola Jukebox Company, which is the only jukebox manufacturer left today in the U.S. And ultimately, the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Rockola won. So my uncle's jukebox business, by court order, they had to go out of business. Now, he went off into other ventures. He actually, in the early 1950s, had a company making hi-fi systems, which was the latest and greatest. You know, if we look at the path of technology, this all looks very archaic to us now. Needles going in grooves on discs made from shellac and then from vinyl. But, you know, way before anything digital and with the quality and ease that we have now. But he went from the jukeboxes into manufacturing hi-fi systems for the home. But approximately 10 years later, about 1958, he was contacted by his mob associates who said, "We need somebody with your kind of expertise in finance." And here's the situation. It's 1958. Castro and his communists are threatening to take over in Cuba. A revolution for good cause, for the exploitation of the people by the dictatorship. But one of the key focuses for the revolution was the casinos that the mob had built in Havana. This was the naughty playground for Americans, and just, you know, a 90-minute flight from Miami. So the mob were very concerned that Castro and the communists were ideologically against gambling and that they would lose their casinos. So they developed a scheme to send guns both to Batista, to the dictatorship, and to Castro. Being good gamblers, they figured if they doubled down, one side or the other would win, and they would still have a piece of the action. Now, the mob runs parallel to a legitimate business. Guns, that's the product. So you need to get them. You need transportation and shipping. And like any other business, you need financing. But if you're working outside the law, you can't really go to a bank and ask for a loan for an illegal enterprise. So they contracted with yet another group, a criminal group out of Montreal, who in fact were the originators of the drug importation known as the French Connection. And that group blew up a vault in a bank in a small town in Ontario, halfway between Toronto and Montreal. And they got away with what the headlines said was the biggest bank robbery in the world. At that time, 1958, it was estimated to be $14 million. Again, if you calculate for inflation, that might be over 200 million today. And this is where my uncle entered the story. They called him and said, "We have all these bonds," which is what they took from the bank. It didn't take money was not critical. The money was small. But the bonds were bearer bonds. Not very common today, but a bearer bond was like a dollar bill. whoever had it in their possession owned it. But of course, there were records of all the serial numbers of these bonds. So they called my uncle and said, "Here, you can make a lot of money out of this if you can fungify these bonds, turn them into cash that we can pay all the other elements of our scheme, the people who broke into the bank, the people who steal the airplanes to fly the guns to Cuba, the people who steal the guns that we're going to need." And so this is where my Uncle Wolf came into the picture with a plan to go to Switzerland, where the banks were known for their discretion, and turn this money into cash.
Riders on the storm, riders on the storm. Into this house we're born, into this world we're thrown. Like a dog without a bone, an actor out on loan. Riders on the storm.
Wow. I mean, he's lucky that he was able to somehow avoid the situation, but he eventually got caught. But I can definitely see how it's real important. It was real important for him to keep pursuing, his love of technology. Anyways, we're almost actually out of time, but I really appreciate you talking to us on this program. And if you guys haven't read this book, I urge you to pick it up. It's called The Jukebox Empire by David Rabinovich.
And I might also add, Bryce, if we could refer your listeners to the website, which is www.jukeboxempire.com. There's a lot further information and interesting bits about this kind of amazing and entertaining story.
Thank you so much.
Bryce, it's been a pleasure to be on the show with you.